Good afternoon, my dear friends. Mrs. Washington at your service once again. It has been some time since we have shared space and company with one another in this year of our Lord of 1773. The Colonel and I have found ourselves back down to the capital city at an unusual time for us, admittedly, but we had some family business that we needed to attend to. And it does my heart very good to be able to share space with you at the conclusion of this, I will admit, very trying year for our family. But, like all things that my parents have taught me since I was very young, with darkness does come light. And even though this year has been quite difficult for our small family, there is light. And I am very pleased to be able to share with all of you, our very dear friends, that my son, John Park Custis, our dear Jack, he is engaged to be married, and very soon in the new year of 1774 shall marry a young lady from Maryland. So we do have something to look forward to in the new year. I must admit, friends, the news of my son marrying and very soon, I am sure, starting a family of his own has caused me and Colonel Washington to be quite reminiscent of these halcyon years that we have enjoyed together. I've been thinking especially at the coming Christmastide season of all of the many traditions that we have enjoyed since all of my children were very small, but specifically Jack. Christmas is a time that should be surrounded by family. And growing up along the banks of the Pamunkey, as I was blessed to do, some only 25 miles from this capital city, we had quite a family to be surrounded with. The winter time, as I am sure you are aware, are filled with short days and long nights. And that meant that the majority of our time spent together was indoors, which I'm sure many of you are experiencing just now. And as the eldest of all of my siblings, as I have the honor to be, my mother usually gave me the honor, although I think honor is a bit strong of a word, of assisting in managing all of my younger siblings, which usually meant that I had to find a way to corral them into one room and prevent all of them from using their 10 fingers from breaking anything that my mother and father held most dear. But it was during those long, dark evenings that we would tell stories, for that is exactly what Christmastide season gives us, the time to share space with one another. And my father, although he was the clerk of New Kent County from almost his arrival on these shores to his dying day, I often thought as a child that he truly did miss his calling as an actor on the stage. For he would spin such tales to my brothers and sisters and I, mostly of a ghostly nature, as most stories are during the Christmastide season. And now, of course, having had 4 children of my own, I believe that the true purpose of telling those ghostly tales was to ensure that all of us would stay in our beds for the entirety of the night. But more than that, my father used to tell us tales with a moral or a lesson to them. And it's those same stories that I found myself reciting to my own children when they were young. And it's those same stories that I now hope that my son, the last of his line, will carry on and tell his children one day. My favorite story from this time of year, it's one that I'm sure originated in London, but my father would always take the names of the people and the places within it and change it around to those people and places that were so familiar to myself and my siblings, so that perhaps we felt as though we were more a part of it. And it's one that my Jack now knows as well. It's a story with a heroine. Her name is Lucinda. And my father always used to begin telling the tale as though our sweet Lucinda lived in New Kent County, which of course she did not live in New Kent County in the original story, but when my father told it, she lived in New Kent County. And she was the apple of her father's eye, being the only surviving child as his wife passed away at the birth of sweet Lucinda. And this made her father especially generous towards his darling daughter, purchasing her the best education that money could buy, purchasing her every single article of clothing that the capital city could afford. Well, as Lucinda grew, and she came to that age where young ladies ought to be thinking about that next phase of their life, well, she became known as the Belle of New Kent. And all of the young gentlemen from the capital city and all around began to also take note of our sweet Lucinda's sweet temperament and intelligence. And all of the beautiful painted peacocks of Williamsburg, of Jamestown, of Norfolk and Yorktown would come flocking to our sweet Lucinda's door every day to pay their respects. All of the best names that you would find walking up and down the main streets of Williamsburg, the Carters, the Lees, the Randolphs, the Birds, all fluttering about our sweet Lucinda in hopes that they might ensnare her as their future bride, including what other gentleman? Now this gentleman, he was not like the rest. He was not a Carter, a Lee, a Randolph, a Bird. In fact, his name was Mr. Freeman. And Mr. Freeman had a very different way about him. Instead of fluttering about Lucinda, he would stand off in the corner very respectfully, hoping that it might gain Lucinda's attention. Well, like most Christmas stories, tragedy must strike. And in our sweet Lucinda's Christmas story, her father, her dear father, died. Now at this point, all of my siblings and I, we were the raptured audience, and we all had to say, "Oh." Well, Lucinda's father, even though his generosity extended to her during his life, his debts caught up with him in death. And as Lucinda was the sole survivor, she herself became the administratrix of her father's estate and spent her days having to divide the estates to pay her dear sweet father's debts. Well, as these young painted peacocks began to learn of Lucinda's new strained financial straits, they all abandoned our sweet Lucinda and fluttered back to the capital city in order to find other young belles with more full pocketbooks, except Mr. Freeman. During the time of Lucinda's greatest grief, Mr. Freeman doubled, he tripled his efforts in attending to our sweet Lucinda, coming every day to her estate in New Kent County at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and knocking on the door. When her man would answer the door, he would never ask to be entered, but just to tell Lucinda that he sends his condolences and deepest respects to her. Well, this is Christmas after all, and with tragedy, miracles must occur. And in our story, a miracle occurs in the fact of a long and lost uncle. In fact, this uncle was so long and so lost that he lived in Albemarle County. And when this uncle heard of the destitute state of his favorite niece, of his only brothers, he determined to settle £20,000 on our sweet Lucinda on the day of her marriage to the man of her choice. Well, Lucinda, being a very wise and intelligent young woman, she wished to test the true moral character of these painted peacocks that she had been dealing with for the majority of her life. And she knew that the Christmas lottery was very soon to be drawn. And as you know, you purchase a ticket for this lottery, and on the day it is drawn, you might win upwards of £10,000. Now, of course, we do not have a lottery in Williamsburg, but this story originated in England. Lucinda began to ask her dearest and truest friends to spread news throughout the capital city that she herself was to win that Christmas lottery. And soon she could tell exactly which house heard the news, for those painted peacocks began returning to her side. Those Carters, those Lees, those Randolphs, those Birds, begging Lucinda to forgive them for abandoning her during her grief. But now their feelings were restored. However, Mr. Freeman ceased his visits during this time, for he did not wish Lucinda to think that the only reason that he was coming to pay call to her was because of this renewed financial status. And Lucinda found that she missed that knock at the door at 2 o'clock every afternoon. Well, Christmas Day came and the lottery was drawn, and of course Lucinda's name was not among those that won the lottery. And immediately on that day, those same painted peacocks who had renewed their their admiration for our Lucinda, immediately withdrew it again, saying that she was a coquette, saying that she was attempting to rob them of their money by falsifying her own financial state. Well, Lucinda, very pleased that she had finally discovered the true nature of these so-called gentlemen, spent the majority of Christmas Day quite happily by herself, until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when a knock came on her door. Immediately she told her man to see whoever it was into her parlor, and sure enough, it was our dear Mr. Freeman. Immediately she began her plea to Mr. Freeman, saying, "Mr. Freeman, I now see that you are a man of true and just moral character, and it would make me happier than anything if you would agree to be my husband. But before you accept my hand in matrimony, there cannot be any secrets between us, and I must tell you, sir, that while I did not win that lottery in Williamsburg, that I have a long and lost uncle from Albemarle County, and he has told me that he should like to settle £20,000 upon me on my wedding day to the man of my choice. Please, Mr. Freeman, would you be that man to me?" Thinking that this would enlighten any young gentleman to know that not only would they soon be married, but be the recipient of £20,000, she looked expectantly at Mr. Freeman, only to find his face downcast and looking away from her. At this point, he rose from the settee and took 3 steps to the left. It were always 3 steps to the left whenever father would tell the tale. Lucinda about to renew her plea to him, Mr. Freeman stopped her and said, "Lucinda, it grieves me to know that you have kept this secret from me. And while, yes, it would make me happier than anything to be your husband, you are correct in that we can never keep secrets. And so before I give you my answer, you must know that I have a secret also to tell you. It is true that I did not win, that you did not win the lottery in Williamsburg. I won the lottery in Williamsburg, and they were married on 12th night." I always loved that story every time Papa would tell it to us, and I tell you, growing up, my sisters and I knew that we would never be put in a position like sweet Lucinda. And certainly when I married my first husband, Mr. Custis, I felt as though I were the Mr. Freeman. But when I was widowed, with 2 small children, gaining the title of Widow Custis made me feel a bit like our sweet Lucinda. And it was not until my own Mr. Freeman made his presence known in the form of Colonel Washington that I felt a renewed hope at the chance of having a happy life. And I am happy to say that we too married on 12th night, on January 6th, and we have had many happy, halcyon years between the 2 of us. And so I thank my father for telling that story to myself and my siblings, and now my own son knows that story as well as I do. And it is my hope that now that he is marrying his dearest love, that he will continue it to the next generation. But you will have to forgive me, my friends. I have grown quite reminiscent over the last few weeks, thinking about losing my last child to matrimony, which of course he's just marrying a young lady across the river from us, but still. But you came for polite conversation, and I should be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have of me. I know it's been some time since I have made myself available here in the capital city to engage in conversation. So I should like to turn it to my man to see if there are any questions from our august body that perhaps they should like me to answer.
Oh, yes, certainly. First of all, we have many Merry Christmases and holiday greetings from friends far and abroad.
Thank you, friends.
Have many questions, too, so I'm going to get into it. There have been a few. Aaron, Leslie, Denise have all asked a variation on the question of what's your favorite part of Christmas, or tradition, or activity?
Oh, my heavens. Well, Aaron, it's a pleasure to hear from you again. I know that you are a good and true friend, and so many others who are asking about the Christmastide season. As you all know, we are currently in the season of Advent, which is, of course, a time of somber reflection. But Christmas is soon upon us, beginning on Christmas Day and celebrated until the 12 days have passed, ending on 12th night. And I must tell you, friends, I do have a very soft spot in my heart for that 12th night. It is my wedding anniversary, after all. Colonel Washington and I decided that both of us should like to be married on 12th night. It is a time for a sense of renewal, a sense of birth, of rebirth, if you will, a sense of new chances of starting over in life. And at the time that we married, both of us were very eager for that new start. And so I think for myself, although Christmas is a wonderful day, it is always 12th night that I look forward to most. Of course, the feasting and the dancing that happens in between, well, they would liven anyone's heart. But that 12th night, I think I look forward to the most.
Wonderful. In fact, you've hit on two other questions that we have. I'm going to start with Sean. He wants to know what your favorite Christmas food is.
Oh, Sean, aren't you kind? I think that you must have been speaking with my brother. I was gifted to me upon my first marriage to Mr. Custis, his mother's old receipt book. And these have receipts from the Park and then the Custis families that date back, into the last century or so. And I carry it with me still. But in it, there is a receipt, my dear, for a great cake. Now, everybody has their own receipt for a great cake. It's like every housewife has her own receipt for brewing beer. But these various receipts on a great cake have been added on to, and they have been improved by the multiple generations, and myself included. And I will admit, my great cake has already been made. It was made back in late October, and it has been being doused with brandy now on a weekly basis, or however often my woman sees fit to do so, all in preparation for that 12th night. It is a very thick, dense loaf filled with fruits, but I do enjoy great cake the most during that time.
And the other question was about dancing. Do you dance at the Christmastide season?
In my much younger years, I attempted to dance. I will tell you, my mother and father spent a great deal of money on an itinerant master coming through New Kent to teach me how to dance, but I fear that I truly never had the patience for it. My husband, Colonel Washington, he is the dancer in the family. He is, for a man of such height as he is, although for me everyone is tall, he moves quite gracefully along the floor, and he does condescend to step a minuet or perhaps a favorite country dance with me every once in a while, but I know that at the end of the evening I have only slowed him down, and so I enjoy sitting and watching him dance more than anything. But if I am pulled up onto the floor, if perhaps the musicians would play a Trip to Paris, I should be more than happy to step with you.
Wonderful. Well, one more question about traditions, and then I'm going to go down a different question route, which is Charlotte wants to know, do you celebrate Boxing Day with your servants?
Charlotte, what a beautiful name. Yes, we do. We ensure that we celebrate Boxing Day with our people, and if those of you who are unaware, Boxing Day is the day after Christmas, the 26th, and it is expected that your people, your servants, your lessers, receive some sort of token, and we do, in fact, give our people tokens. We also give them time away from their work when possible, so that they may spend Boxing Day or some part of the Christmastide season with their families. We have a great number of people on our property, not only on the Washington property up on the Potomac, but also down on the Custis properties down here in the Tidewater. And while, of course, it is illegal for slaves to marry, the Colonel and I have always acknowledged the marriages of our people to one another, even though it might not be recorded in a church or in a court of law. And we attempt to honor and acknowledge those family units whenever possible, and we can. And so it is our intention during this time to also allow them time to spend with their families when possible, yes. What a wonderful question. Thank you, Charlotte.
Now this next question is a little bit heavier, but Tina recognizes that with the passing of Patsy here recently, she was wondering, how has this tragedy changed your Christmastide activities?
Oh, Tina, my goodness, sir, you have changed the mood of the room quite drastically. You are correct. My daughter did pass away earlier this year. My daughter was my youngest. Named for me, in fact, Martha Park Custis, called Patsy, as I was called Patsy when I was young as well. And Patsy, she were always a very fragile little thing. But when she were very young, she developed what doctors called the nervous fits. And they caused her to shake uncontrollably, to fall down, lose possession of herself. One doctor called it epilepsy. And I will tell you, Tina, we tried every available known remedy in the book. Had her seen by doctors in Alexandria and Fredericksburg, even here in Williamsburg. Dr. de Sequeira, who keeps a shop by the Capitol, saw her no less than 9 times several years ago. And we tried every available thing. We tried different diets. We took her to the warm springs. We even, I will be perfectly honest with you, I am embarrassed to admit this. We even had Mr. Evans, a blacksmith, come early one morning and affix an iron clamp ring to my daughter's finger, a truly medieval belief that they thought would cure her of these fits. But nothing seemed to work, and she had her good times. In fact, earlier this year, she were at her best. She were happy, she were alive, she were glowing, she were playing with her friend Millie Posey, and oh my goodness, when my son announced his engagement, she were over the moon with the thought of having a new sister. And the Colonel and I are very blessed that we got to see that in Patsy. But earlier this summer, she were seized with one of her usual fits, and she expired within 2 or 3 minutes without uttering scarcely a groan or a sigh. And I will be perfectly frank with you, friends. My daughter's death did take me to the lowest ebbs of my misery. So this Christmas shall be very different, I think. And perhaps it is for that reason that I'm finding myself thinking of Christmases long ago, to not only lose my 17-year-old daughter, but at the thought of my son also having his own family to focus on rather than mine. Well, perhaps it is a very selfish thing to be thinking of me rather than my children, but the Colonel has been exceedingly kind to myself and my family during this time. You know, he is not my children's father. They are Custis's, not Washington's. But Patsy, from the moment she met and locked eyes with Colonel Washington so many years ago, she had him wrapped around her little finger so tightly that I think her death was almost more difficult for him. So it shall be a different Christmas. And I know many people are having different Christmases this year. But I'm sure that there are brighter days ahead. And that is the best that we can do, is remember those with rosemary and saying their names, but also continuing on as best as we can with our new normal.
I don't think there can be a better thing for a parent or a mother to do than to think of their children. I'm sure Tammy thanks you as well, because she was going to ask you to share memories of Patsy. And boy, did you. Thank you. But with a look back, it should only be accompanied with a look to the future. And there's a question here that was asked by Todd, but I'm going to change it ever so slightly because I don't know where I'm wandering here. I think there's a bit of a story, and he seems like he might be trying to stir up a little tension this holiday season, because he seems to believe that the Colonel was quite angry when he found out that Jackie had gotten engaged before finishing his education. Is that something you can speak to?
Well, I don't know if angry is quite the correct term, Todd, unless you have been speaking with Reverend Boucher, my son's former tutor. Notice I say former tutor. We were shocked. As you all know, friends, my son is beneath his age of majority, being 21 for gentlemen, and under the eyes of the law, he is considered an infant. And oftentimes he acts as one. But regardless, any of those major decisions in life, for instance, binding yourself in matrimony, ought to be decided when you are beneath the age of your majority by your parent, being me, and your guardian, being Colonel Washington, as he has been my son's guardian since he was very, very small. But it was shocking to say the least, to hear my son come back from school, as he had been at school in Annapolis for some time, and announce to us that he had become engaged. But I must tell you, sir, perhaps to put your mind at ease, that the Colonel and I are so fond of Miss Calvert. Eleanor Calvert is a young lady of excellent quality, and she is an example of her mother's teachings, and we could not be more pleased with Jack's choice of bride. My son, he always puts things in a different order than the rest of society. I have learned that about him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and so I am not altogether shocked that this is the path that he has taken, but I think it is a bit much to say that the Colonel was angry. Surprised more than anything.
Well,
Sir?
Yes, I think a wonderful balanced question. Doug asked a bit ago, but I think this is perfect to ask now. What do you believe is the base of the affection between the Colonel and yourself?
Between the Colonel and myself?
Yes. You
Heavens.
were telling your story earlier and how you would find your own love after you were widowed, and thought you might want to talk just a little bit more about that.
Well, my goodness, aren't we getting quite personal today, friends? I will say, the Colonel and I, we were reintroduced to one another through the kindness of some friends of ours at a time where I think life had been lived thoroughly by both of us. What I mean to say is, when I were reintroduced to Colonel Washington on that very cold night in March of '58, at the Chamberlains, which are my next-door neighbors from my estate in New Kent County. You must understand, friends, I was not a young, flippant, naive girl of 15. I was a woman who had been widowed and lost 2 of my children, as well as my father. And I was the administratrix of the entirety of the Custis estate, meaning I was solely responsible for not only my children's legacy and inheritance, but the well-being of over 17,000 acres spread over 6 counties, including 300 people that work upon them. My husband, well, he was not at the time, Colonel Washington, at the time, of course, was a man who had lived through a war, with more war facing him. He was suffering from a debilitating disease that truly the doctors in the army thought were to kill him. And so you see, I think we found in one another a commonality in understanding, certainly affection with one another. But those life events, they make you grow up in a way that I know that when I was 18 and I married Daniel Park Custis, I could not have even imagined the life that I would live. And so in that, I think that we have always understood one another at a deeper level, considering we were reintroduced at a later time. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and actually we have so many questions. And
I apologize. I'm just chatting away.
So little time. What I thought I would do is maybe throw a few questions at you really quick before we have to part for the day.
I see.
You can just give quick answers because some of these are pretty simple. Does that seem agreeable to you?
Of course, sir.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Washington. The first one comes from an 8th grader who wants to know what your favorite gift that the Colonel got you for Christmas.
Aren't you kind? I will say it was not for Christmas, but my favorite gift that the Colonel has given me, well, I am wearing it just now, this set of garnet jewelry. It is a necklace as well as earrings, and garnet, of course, shines in candlelight so much more beautifully than diamonds do, but he purchased it for me, and I adore it. I wear it every chance that I can.
That's wonderful. In fact, you answered my next question. It was going to be from Tina asking if there was a story behind that, but already answered that. So instead, I'm going to go with Karen, who wants to know, what is your favorite Christmas carol?
Oh, nothing that you would wish for me to sing.
I didn't ask you to sing, only to share perhaps the name with the
I saw carol. 3 ships.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dave was wondering, do you have a typical Christmas Eve meal?
No, I apologize. No, Christmas does not begin until Christmas Day. But we always slaughter about 700 or so hogs during the fall season, so of course we have plenty of meat to have on the 24th of December, so I'm sure something from the smokehouse would do.
Wonderful. Frank wanted to ask, and we talked about this earlier with Boxing Day, did you give your enslaved people that work off or on Christmas, or do you give them presents?
Oh, well, we can where we can, I should say, but of course those that work in the house, their work is needed. My woman Doll, who is my cook, she has been my cook for years at this point, and we have an understanding that we will make all arrangements as possible, but sometimes we must perform our duties as required.
Wonderful. And finally, John, who is apparently a distant relative from the Ohio country.
We have so many Johns in the family.
I know, but he is asking, and I like this, do you have a favorite beverage that you serve at this time of year?
Well, John, you must understand, I do have a bit of a sweet tooth. So any type of punch that has massive amounts of sugar and citrus in it, I am very fond of. Our neighbors and our dearest friends, the Fairfaxes, who I am sad to say another sad part of this year is that they have removed themselves to England, but they lived next door at Belvoir. They would always make the most delicious Arac punch for Twelfth Night that I am very much in hopes that my woman has received the receipt from Mrs. Fairfax's woman.
Wonderful. Oh, and one more here of the fast ones. Julie wants to know, what is the Colonel's favorite Christmas-tide dessert? I know you mentioned that great cake earlier.
The Colonel's favorite Christmas-tide dessert is whatever I put on the table in front of him. Is that short enough?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Well, I'm afraid we're coming to the end of our time, but one last question for you. We have talked so much about past Christmases. What are your hopes for this Christmas and this Christmas-tide season and even into the new year?
Oh, you know, this is a time of hope, is it not? As we are approaching the Christmas season, the birth of our Savior was a moment of hope for our world. And I think, sir, you worded it perfectly. I have hope for next year. As I said at the beginning of our conversation, my parents both taught all of us as very young children that with darkness there will be light. And it is my hope that while all of us have lived through quite a tumultuous year this year, I think that I can speak for most watching, that next year provides hope. At least that is the way our household is viewing it. There shall be new life. There shall be new love. There shall be new trials, and there shall be errors that will be made. But if we gather together as a community and as a family, I'm sure that we can overcome even the most difficult challenges. And that is what I've learned in my long life at this point thus far, is though that the divine providence might throw multiple challenges at you, he knows exactly how much one can endure. And he does it to test you. And he does it to make you a better person. And so with that, I have been tested this year. My family has been tested. But it has grown us closer together. And my hope for next year is that we will take the lessons that we have learned this year and use it to make us even stronger together. My friends, you have no idea how much this conversation has lifted my heart. I have been avoiding people for so long this year because I did not know how I would behave in front of them with the loss of my daughter. But you have proven to me that friends will always support a friend. And please know that you will always be welcomed as a friend at our estate, just as you have always made Colonel Washington and myself feel welcome here. And so on behalf of Colonel Washington and myself, the entire Custis, Dandridge, and Washington families, I wish you a happy Christmastide and my sincere hopes for a happy New Year.